The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the open field where Lily knelt beside Shadow. The once vibrant horse lay still on his side, ribs visible beneath his dull coat, each labored breath seeming like it might be his last. Wildflowers swayed gently around them, their sweet scent mingling with the earthy smell of grass and horse. Tears streamed down Lily's face as she placed her trembling hand on Shadow's neck. "Shadow," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please don't leave me. Not you too." At the sound of his name, something miraculous happened. Shadow's ears twitched forward. His eyes, which had been half closed and distant, suddenly focused on Lily's face. With tremendous effort, he lifted his head, pressing his muzzle against her palm. His eyes, deep pools of recognition and love, locked with hers in a gaze that spoke volumes without words. The ranch hands watching from the fence line gasped. The vet shook his head in disbelief. No one had expected Shadow to respond to anything anymore. But here he was, fighting back, all because a teenage girl had called his name with love. But to understand how we reached this moment of connection, we need to go back to when everything felt broken. 3 months earlier, Lily Morgan stood at her mother's grave, feeling as hollow as the freshly dug earth before her. At 16, she'd lost the one person who truly understood her. Her mother had been her best friend, her riding partner, her compass in the world. Now Lily was adrift, going through the motions of life without really living it. Her father tried his best, but grief had carved a canyon between them that neither knew how to cross. When he suggested they spend the summer at her uncle's ranch, her mother's childhood home, Lily agreed only because staying in their empty house felt unbearable. Uncle Jack's ranch sat on the outskirts of town, a place that had once been bustling but now showed signs of neglect. The paint peeled from the barn, fences sagged, and the once meticulously kept pastures grew wild with weeds. Uncle Jack had his own struggles, and the ranch reflected his battle with arthritis and mounting debts. It was on her 3rd day there, while wandering the back fields, that Lily first saw Shadow. The black horse stood alone in the far corner of an overgrown pasture, separated from the other horses. Even from a distance, Lily could see his protruding ribs and the way he held his head low, as if the effort to lift it was too much. "That's Shadow," Uncle Jack said when she asked about him later. Previous owners ran him nearly to death, then abandoned him when he couldn't perform anymore. Bought him at auction for next to nothing, thinking I could save him, but he shook his head. "Some things are just too broken to fix. Vet's coming next week to put him down." That night, Lily couldn't sleep. Images of the lonely horse haunted her. She recognized something in his stance, in the emptiness of his gaze. It mirrored the hollowness she felt inside herself. Before dawn broke, she slipped out of the house and made her way to Shadow's field. The horse didn't acknowledge her presence as she approached the fence. He stood motionless, staring at nothing. Lily climbed through the rails and sat cross-legged in the dewy grass, keeping a respectful distance. "I know what it's like," she said softly, not expecting him to understand her words, but needing to speak them anyway. "To feel like everything good is gone. Like there's nothing worth fighting for anymore." Shadow's ear twitched slightly, the only indication he heard her at all. Lily stayed until the sun rose fully, then returned to the house before anyone noticed she was gone. The next morning, she came prepared. In her pocket were apple slices and a small brush. Again, she sat quietly, this time reading aloud from a dog-eared copy of Black Beauty that had been her mother's. Shadow remained distant, but she noticed he had shifted slightly closer to where she sat. On the 3rd day, she brought a carrot and placed it halfway between them. For hours, nothing happened. Then, as the afternoon shadows lengthened, Shadow took 3 cautious steps forward and stretched his neck to reach the offering. His lips gently took the carrot, and for a brief moment, his eyes met hers. "Well, I'll be," came a gruff voice behind her. Uncle Jack stood at the fence, watching with surprise. "That horse hasn't taken food from a human hand since he got here." Lily felt a small spark ignite within her chest, something she hadn't felt since before her mother's illness. It wasn't happiness exactly, but purpose. "Can I keep working with him?" she asked, her voice stronger than it had been in months. Uncle Jack hesitated. "Lily, honey, that horse is scheduled to be put down. Don't get attached." "Please," she said, "just give me some time. I think we need each other." Something in her earnestness must have reached him because he nodded slowly. 2 weeks. But don't expect miracles. Word spread quickly around the small ranch community. Most people shook their heads at the foolishness of a grieving city girl thinking she could save a horse that veterinarians had given up on. Ranch hand Miguel was particularly vocal. "That horse is dangerous," he warned. "Not mean, but broken inside. Broken things lash out when they're scared." But Lily was undeterred. Each day, she spent hours with Shadow. She brought a folding chair and sat reading, talking, sometimes just being quiet together. She learned to move slowly, to telegraph her movements so he wouldn't startle. She discovered he liked the sound of humming, but shied away from whistling. After a week, Shadow would approach her for treats, his movements still hesitant but deliberate. She began bringing a soft brush, and after several days of letting him sniff and examine it, he allowed her to gently groom his neck and shoulders. The first time she touched him, she felt him tremble beneath her fingers, but he didn't pull away. "You're doing so well," she whispered, her own eyes filling with tears as she worked tangles from his mane. "We both are." As Shadow's coat began to regain some shine, Lily too began to show signs of life returning. She started eating properly again. She spoke more at dinner. She even laughed when Uncle Jack's ancient dog Rusty stole her boot and paraded around the yard with it. By the end of the second week, Shadow would come to the fence when he saw her approaching. He'd follow her around the paddock as she picked up rocks or pulled weeds. One afternoon, as rain clouds gathered on the horizon, he surprised her by resting his head on her shoulder, his warm breath tickling her neck. "I think he's chosen you," said a new voice. Lily turned to see an older woman watching them from the fence line. She recognized Dr. Elena Martinez, the veterinarian who had been checking on Shadow. "He still needs a lot of care," Dr. Martinez continued, climbing through the fence. "His body condition is improving, but there's something else wrong. Notice how he favors that back left leg." Lily nodded. She'd observed his slight limp, but hadn't known what to make of it. "I'd like to do some tests," the vet said. "If you're serious about helping him, that is." "I am," Lily replied without hesitation. The X-rays revealed old fractures that had never properly healed, and blood work showed lingering infection. Dr. Martinez prescribed a regimen of medications and specific exercises. Uncle Jack balked at the cost until Lily offered all her savings, money she'd been setting aside for a car when she turned 17. "Mom would want me to do this," she told her father on the phone that night. For the first time since the funeral, they really talked. He listened as she described Shadow, the connection they shared, and how working with him made her feel close to her mother again. "She'd be proud of you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll help with the vet bills." The treatment began, and for a while, Shadow seemed to improve. Lily established a routine: morning medications hidden in applesauce, gentle walking exercises, afternoon grooming, and evenings spent simply being together. She talked to him about her mother, about her fears and dreams, about the crushing weight of grief that sometimes made it hard to breathe. "You're the only one who really understands," she told him, her forehead pressed against his. "Everyone else wants me to move on, to be okay. But you know it's not that simple." Then came the setback. One morning, Lily arrived to find Shadow lying down, unwilling or unable to rise. His eyes were dull with pain, his breathing labored. She called for help, and soon Uncle Jack, Dr. Martinez, and 2 ranch hands were gathered around. "Could be colic," the vet said, examining him. "Or the infection might have spread. We need to get him to the clinic." But when they tried to help Shadow stand, he panicked, thrashing and whinnying in fear. One of his hooves caught Lily's arm, leaving a deep gash. The sight of her blood seemed to terrify Shadow more, and he retreated into himself, eyes rolling white with fear. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," Uncle Jack said, helping Lily wrap her bleeding arm. "He's too unpredictable, too damaged." "He didn't mean it," Lily insisted, tears streaming down her face. "He was scared." "Lily," Dr. Martinez said gently, "sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do is let go." The words echoed those she'd heard at her mother's hospice bed. Let go. Accept what you cannot change. Find peace and surrender. For 3 days, Lily stayed away from the paddock, nursing both her physical wound and the deeper cut of potential loss. Shadow remained down, accepting minimal food and water from the ranch hands, but showing no improvement. The deadline loomed. If he didn't show significant recovery by the weekend, Uncle Jack insisted they would have to make the difficult decision. On the third night, a thunderstorm rolled in. As lightning cracked across the sky, Lily thought of Shadow alone in the field, terrified of the noise and unable to seek shelter. Before she could second-guess herself, she was pulling on boots and a raincoat. The rain pounded against her as she made her way to the paddock. Shadow lay where she had last seen him, his dark coat slick with rain, his eyes reflecting the lightning flashes. She approached slowly, speaking his name over and over, her voice competing with the thunder. When she reached him, she didn't try to make him move. Instead, she sat beside him in the mud and rain, sheltering his head as best she could with her coat. "I'm not giving up on you," she said fiercely. "I know you're in pain. I know you're scared. But you're not alone anymore, and neither am I. We're going to fight this together." Throughout the night, she stayed, singing songs her mother had taught her, telling Shadow stories of sunny days to come. As dawn broke and the storm cleared, she felt him stir. Slowly, with tremendous effort, Shadow gathered his legs beneath him and pushed himself upright. He stood shakily, leaning slightly against Lily for support. When Uncle Jack found them, he couldn't believe his eyes. Shadow was not only standing but walking in small circles around Lily, who was covered in mud but beaming with joy. Dr. Martinez arrived later that morning and was equally amazed. "I've never seen anything like it," she admitted. "His will to live was gone, but somehow you brought it back." The next few weeks brought steady improvement. Shadow gained weight, his coat developed a healthy sheen, and though he would always have a slight limp, he moved with increasing confidence. Lily discovered he responded particularly well to voice commands, especially when she called his name in a certain tone, the same way her mother used to call her when she was little. Word spread about the girl who had saved the dying horse. People from neighboring ranches came to witness their bond. A local reporter wrote a story about them, which caught the attention of a nearby horse sanctuary that specialized in equine rehabilitation. The director of the sanctuary, Mariah Williams, visited the ranch and was impressed by what she saw. "We have an event coming up," she told Lily. "A fundraiser where we showcase success stories. Would you and Shadow consider participating? Nothing strenuous, just a simple demonstration of the bond you've formed." Lily was hesitant. Shadow had never left the safety of the ranch since his arrival, and she worried about the stress of a new environment. But Dr. Martinez thought it might be good for both of them to share their story. "You've accomplished something remarkable," she said. "Maybe it could inspire others not to give up on animals that seem beyond saving." After much consideration, Lily agreed. They had 2 weeks to prepare. Each day, she worked with Shadow on basic commands and desensitization exercises. She introduced him to different objects, sounds, and people, always praising his courage and respecting his boundaries. The day before the event, disaster struck. Shadow and Lily were practicing in the main paddock when a delivery truck backfired loudly on the nearby road. Shadow bolted in terror, crashing through a section of old fencing and disappearing into the wooded area beyond the ranch. For hours, search parties combed the area, calling his name and searching for tracks. Night fell with no sign of him. Lily refused to come inside, continuing to search with a flashlight until her father and uncle physically brought her back to the house. "He's out there alone and scared," she sobbed. "What if he's hurt? What if he thinks I abandoned him?" At first light, she was back out searching. It was Miguel who spotted hoof prints leading to an old field on the far side of the property, a sun-drenched meadow filled with wildflowers that had once been her mother's favorite spot. Lily ran ahead of the others, her heart pounding. As she crested the hill, she saw him. Shadow lay motionless in the center of the field, his black coat stark against the colorful blooms. He wasn't moving. This brings us back to where our story began. Lily knelt beside Shadow in that sun-drenched field, her hand on his neck, feeling his labored breathing. The vet had arrived and stood a few paces back, his expression grim. Shadow had run himself to exhaustion, reopening old injuries and possibly causing new ones. His system was in shock. "Shadow," Lily whispered, her voice breaking. "Please don't leave me. Not you too." At the sound of his name, his ears twitched forward. His eyes, which had been half closed and distant, suddenly focused on her face. With tremendous effort, he lifted his head, pressing his muzzle against her palm. His eyes locked with hers in a gaze that spoke volumes. "He recognizes you," Dr. Martinez said softly, amazement in her voice. "Keep talking to him." Lily did. She reminded him of how far they'd come, of the promises they'd made to each other. As she spoke, Shadow's breathing steadied. With gentle encouragement and support from the vet and ranch hands, he was eventually able to stand. The sanctuary event was postponed, but a month later, when Shadow had fully recovered, they were ready. The arena was packed with people who had heard their story. When Lily led Shadow into the ring, a hush fell over the crowd. She wore no riding gear, carried no whip or crop. Shadow wore only a simple halter with a lead rope that hung loose between them. Lily began by telling their story, her loss, his abandonment, their shared journey toward healing. Then she demonstrated their connection. She walked, and Shadow followed without being led. She stopped, and he stopped. She called his name, and he came to her, pressing his forehead against her chest in a gesture of absolute trust. For their final demonstration, Lily removed Shadow's halter entirely. She walked to the center of the arena and stood with her back to him. The audience held its collective breath. "Shadow," she called, her voice clear and confident. The horse, standing at the far end of the arena, lifted his head. His ears pricked forward. Then, with deliberate steps, he walked directly to her, stopping just behind her shoulder. Lily turned and wrapped her arms around his neck, and together they stood in perfect harmony, two souls who had found in each other the strength to live again. The crowd erupted in applause, many wiping away tears. But Lily barely heard them. In that moment, there was only Shadow and the knowledge that sometimes the most profound healing comes from helping another heal. In the months that followed, Lily and Shadow became ambassadors for the sanctuary's rehabilitation program. Uncle Jack's ranch, revitalized by the attention and subsequent donations, began specializing in rescue horses. Lily's father moved closer, taking a teaching position at the local high school so they could be together while she finished school. And every evening, Lily would still sit with Shadow in his paddock, sometimes talking, sometimes silent, two survivors who had called each other back from the edge of darkness, one gentle voice at a time.